So the free application for federal student aid, also known as FAFSA, typically opens on October 1st. This year, those students have to wait until December.
Yeah, the form is undergoing some big updates designed to simplify the process. Here to tell us about the changes and help students with the new application is Frank Gomez, Associate Director in the Office of Scholarships and Financial Aid at the University of Houston. Frank, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, so we were just chatting a little bit. I remember years ago, probably more than 20 years ago, filling out this FAFSA form. It was such a long and tedious process. So it is a lot shorter now, but these changes are really updating it.
Right. So as I mentioned, this is the biggest change in 40 years to the FAFSA application.
Wow.
It was very intimidating to fill out almost 100 questions on the application. And so what the government has done is they've decided to simplify it, where they want to knock it down to around 35 to 60 questions, just depending on how much income a family makes. So that's one of the major changes to help the application be a lot easier for families to complete.
So as we look at some of these changes, before we do that, for folks that don't understand what the FAFSA is really for, does every student have to fill it out? Why would someone need a FAFSA?
Well, you want to fill out the FAFSA even if you don't think you qualify, because surprisingly, a lot of students leave free money on the table. So filling out the FAFSA allows the Department of Education to figure out what your financial need might be, and specifically determining whether or not you're eligible for free grant money, which is a big help for families that need to pay for college with the expenses nowadays.
Yeah, because that grant money, you don't have to pay that back.
Right, it's free money, you don't pay that back.
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's huge.
It's like a scholarship in that sense, yeah.
So, Frank, let's kind of go through some of these major changes. So we talked about cutting down the amount of questions, so that'll help with the time.
Definitely.
Eliminating the expected family contribution calculation, and then replacing it with what?
So they're replacing it with the SAI. So that the government likes to use these acronyms, three-letter acronyms, SAI, EFC, and things like that. So the SAI is replacing the expected family contribution, which kind of used to be a little misleading to families. They thought, okay, this is my EFC based on what the FAFSA, when I completed it, what I'm expected to contribute towards my college educational costs. But that's really not the case. Some families paid more, some paid less. So what they did was they changed it to the Student Aid Index, which allows the Financial Aid Office to figure out how much need the student has. So it helps us to figure out how much financial aid we need to award them.
This one looks good on the surface, expanding federal Pell Grant eligibility.
Yes, absolutely. So there's some changes to the federal methodology on calculating how much aid a student can receive. And one of that's going to affect, single parent homes. So if you're a dependent student and you have a single parent, or if you are an independent student and are a single parent. Before, if you made $33,000 your adjusted gross income or less, you automatically would get a Pell Grant. Now they bumped that up to around $40,000. If you come from married parents, the income was around $50,000. So now they bumped that up to $60,000 adjusted gross income to be eligible for the Pell Grant. So it's more people end up qualifying.
Okay, automatically populating your federal income tax data from the IRS. Because I'd be like, Dad, go get those return
As soon as my dad heard we needed tax forms, he's like, I'm out.
Go get them.
You sure you need the money?
Right. It is very daunting to get all that information. You're looking at 100 questions back in the old FAFSA, but now they're going to automatically import your federal tax information, the FTI, another acronym. And that's important to know that families have to authorize or consent to allow the Department of Education to pull your federal tax information from the IRS directly into the FAFSA. If a family member or contributor refuses to provide that consent, the applicant will be notified that you will not be eligible for financial aid. So
that's huge.
It'll certainly cut down on fraud and certainly speed up the process by doing it digitally. You don't have to go get all those reprints. How about this one? And this is, I think, somewhat controversial, as we talked about, removing questions about selective service and siblings that are enrolled in college. Siblings, that's a big one.
Right. So they did remove the requirement to the question about whether or not you register for selective service and whether or not you have ever been convicted of a drug offense. So those questions have been removed going forward. But the siblings are no longer, if you're in a household with multiple children going to college, they are no longer taking that into consideration, unfortunately. And that's going to have an effect on families that have multiple children attending college, because if you had, for example, an EFC of 10,000, they would divide that by the number of children you had in college. So it would reduce it down to 5,000 $5,000, which would make that family Pell eligible, but that's no longer the case. I will say, though, schools are going to take into consideration through appeals whether or not they can have that reevaluated. So you might want to get in touch with the financial aid office to discuss that a little bit more.
At the specific school that you're looking to attend. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And Frank, translating the application, so now it'll be available in even more languages.
Absolutely. So it's going to be more accessible to a lot of different families who, speak a different language. So that's a really nice change as well.
That's huge.
So the dates are important this year because they've changed. What other things, like, is there a checklist or something that students really should go and say, if I have all these ducks in a row, we should be okay?
Well, first and foremost, students should go to the FASFA website. That's FASFA.gov. They want to go there to apply. As you mentioned earlier, the application is supposed to come out in December. The Federal Department of Education has not yet told us an exact date, but by law, they have to release it by January 1st. So it might come out on New Year's. So
they're aiming for a sooner date, but we know how fast they go sometimes.
Yeah.
No offense.
So yeah, that's coming out. But I think what else?
I mean, there's probably a lot to think about.
There's a lot.
You do need the parent involvement, right? Like, certainly underclassmen can figure this out probably on their own. They need parental documents and things, right?
Right. It's a lot of information. Families do need to have their 2022 tax information. That's what's going to be needed when they're filling out the FAFSA application. And they want to go to studentaid.gov and create an FSA ID, because that's also going to be mandatory for all applicants filling out the FAFSA application. So that's another website that students want to go to fill that information out as well.
They're going to need
and
an
there's
account,
a checklist
basically.
there.
Okay, so that's where the checklist is.
And there's also a calculator on there that will give them an estimate of their financial aid eligibility, whether or not they're eligible for a Pell Grant. So it's really a good idea for students to visit that website as well.
Just get familiar with it, right? Because
Absolutely.
once you do it, you're like, okay, I know what I need to do. I know this process, and then you feel more comfortable.
For sure. And they want to create their FSA ID as soon as possible. They can actually create that now, because it can take up to 3 days to create that. And it's important that the students complete their applications as soon as possible when it does get released, because there's important deadlines to be aware of. And for a lot of universities, they have this thing called a priority deadline, where if you don't fill out your application by that deadline, and for example, at the University of Houston, it's March 15th. If you don't fill it out before then you might not be eligible for additional aid, such as state grants and institutional grants and scholarships, in addition to federal grants and loans.
Do you find in your line of work a lot of kids leave money on the table?
Absolutely. I'm really surprised at how much money is left behind, and it just comes down to awareness. And a lot of students were they couldn't get through all of those questions on the application because it's so daunting. But hopefully now with this FAFSA simplification, it'll make it a lot easier for families and students to complete that application.
It's all about that. Get that money.
Yeah,
Our website says it's the estimator. It's like, 5 to 10 minutes, you should be done. I was like, all right.
No,
if it's 30 questions, maybe.
Right.
Yeah, it should take about 20 to 30 minutes for the student and up to an hour now for a parent. So it should be a lot easier.
Okay. Cutting down on the time little by little.
Love it. All right, Frank Gomez with the University of Houston. Thank you.
Thank you.